So I think a reasonable question in this series is who gave the two longest-winded guys the longest sections possible, and it's the longest-winded guys. Who gave them to themselves? So today in Matthew 24, where Jesus talked about the destruction of Jerusalem, and in that he brings in images of cosmic judgment because it is a picture of what the final judgment will be. And now in Matthew chapter 25, he turns to teaching that you kind of look at it, you're like, well, it kind of applies when Jesus is coming at the end of the destruction of Jerusalem. It kind of applies specifically when we get to the very end. It seems like there is an ultimate final culmination. That's because a lot of the principles of faithfulness and waiting and doing the things that God has called us to do apply, whether it's a current tense judgment of destruction or the final judgment. Those principles that guide us and will allow us to endure in either case are going to be the same principles that will allow us to honor God. So there's three sections of Matthew chapter 25. We're not going to read all of it by any means. We're going to read the first section and then pull out key verses out of the last two sections. There's two parables, two illustrations, two stories that illustrate spiritual truth, and then there's a final declaration, prophecy, future-telling picture of what the final judgment will be like. So let's start in Matthew chapter 25, verses 1 through 13. The kingdom of heaven shall be likened unto 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. Now 5 of them were wise and 5 were foolish. Those who were foolish took their lamps and took no oil with them. But the wise took oil in their vessel with their lamps. But while the bridegroom was away, they all slumbered and slept. And at midnight a cry was heard, Behold, the bridegroom is coming. Go out to meet him. Then all those virgins who arose and trimmed their lamps, and the foolish said to the wise, Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out. But the wise answered, saying, No, lest there should not be enough for us and you, but rather go to those who sell and buy for yourselves. And while they went to buy, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready didn't get into the wedding, and the door was shut. Afterwards, the other virgins came also, saying, Lord, Lord, open to us. But he answered and said, Assuredly I say to you, I do not know you. Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour when the Son of Man is coming. Jesus gives this parable about a wedding feast, where there's these 10 virgins, which we'll broadly think of as bridesmaids. It's probably a good modern analog. And they go to meet the groom. Half of them are prepared with oil, and the other half are not prepared. And so when it's time to get ready and get the show on the road, half of them are ready and can receive. The other half have to try and go by, and they can't get back in time to where they're able to be prepared to go into the wedding, and they're excluded from this wedding feast. Now, this is one of those places where the cultural divide and expectations around how weddings work and around how feasts work can kind of cause us to keep the main picture of we need to be ready, but it can also cause us to miss some details. And if I have a certain personality flaw, it's that the day of the sermon, I realized I need a really complicated chart and animations to try and illustrate this, at great peril to it actually working. So bear with me in this. But here's a picture of what ancient weddings looked like in this time. You had a groom's family and you had a bride's family. And so they would enter into, first of all, the first step was they would enter into some sort of understanding or agreement that this would be a suitable match that was going to happen. There would be some broad agreement to move forward for this. And with this agreement in place, the groom would begin to build a house either next to his father's house, on his father's house attached, or in that area. And as soon as it was sufficiently satisfactory where it could house him and his bride-to-be, he would be told by his father that it's okay, and you can go and you can take your wife or meet your wife, be joined to your wife. So the first thing that would happen is there's kind of an initial word that would go out, a word sent ahead, and then the groom would later depart, kind of with some fanfare. There's sort of that, slap on the shoulder on the way out the door. But they've got someone going ahead to signal, hey, get ready. Because they didn't have cell phones, they didn't have telecommunications. You've got to communicate this and give people a little bit of time. So there'd be an initial messenger sent so they could get the big wedding festivities taken care of at the bride's house, and then the groom would depart sometime after that. Well, so in this, you kind of know this is 3A and this is 3B. When this initial word is sent and arrives, what would happen is these virgins or these bridesmaids, you might say, they would come out and receive the groom. And as they come out and receive the groom, the bridal party, and the groom would then go to the bride's family's house, and then you have your wedding, which would involve, the arguing over the dowry and things like this. which essentially was the family serving as the gatekeepers to suitable matches and things like that, and then the wife would have the opportunity to agree or to approve or disagree. Aubrey and I had the chance to meet a family from Africa where some of these traditions still exist, and he said, you don't want an aunt who wants to cause you trouble on the bride's side, because they can really make your life miserable, apparently. In some of these negotiations and haggling, that today is more of a rite of passage sort of situation. But this wedding would include all of that, and they're ultimately joined together, and then the bride and groom would then return here to start their new life together. So whenever you talk about getting married, and the engagement process, the betrothal process, this is the whole picture in view to kind of get that idea. So basically, our story happens kind of in this 3A, 3B, and 5 right here. That's kind of where our story's happening. So what is it that they're called to do? Well, it says they need to go and they need to get oil and an oil lamp for cedar. Now, when you think about oil lamps, I've kind of got a picture in my head something like this. We actually had one of those in our house, at my mom's house. Whenever we lose power, she'd turn this thing on and get the wick, and she had some oil, and we'd use that for light whenever in Oklahoma, usually it was the wind blowing, so that was what usually caused the power to go out. You might want to get one of these this weekend, for those of you who are, that's not actually what it would make, but if we think about something like this, it probably looks something a little more like this in their day and age, or perhaps even more crudely, it might be a torch of some sort that you would carry with you, and you might say, well, why do you need it? Well, obviously it's required for light, because there's street lights and things like that. But if you say to yourselves, why do the 5 foolish virgins need this? It's like, okay, you ran out of oil, but can't you just mooch off everybody else? You know, this was me. The Boy Scout motto was be prepared, and I was a terrible Boy Scout, because it seemed like every camp out I forgot my flashlight. And so basically what ended up happening is someone takes mercy on you, or you put your tent up in the dark. And you look kind of dumb, but you make it. So it's like, why do they actually have to have the lamp? They could just let your eyes adjust. Well, what's going on here is the torch or the lamp is a sign of belonging. Because the whole point is, without the light pollution you have today, you actually kind of could see at night a little bit with the moonlight and the starlight and things like that. So really, the torch and things like this and the lamp, it's a symbol that you are a crasher or a thief. That means you haven't just crashed into the wedding party and joined the parade to go eat and partake in the feast. You actually belong here. It's not something people would be able to just drum up. And so the fact that they're coming in late to the party, they're saying, hey, we've got our torches, it looks like you were never invited in the first place. Is why you run into this issue. And so for them to forget oil, because you have to continually feed this thing with oil, to forget the oil is to forget the most important and necessary things that can be included in this event. And if we think about an event like a wedding, I mean, how much sorrow would we have if we missed one of our near immediate family members' weddings just because of negligence? I mean, think about that. If you didn't get to your daughter's wedding or your sister's wedding because, I mean, accidents happen. I mean, there's enough loss in that. But if you just you forgot to put gas in your car and you missed it, how negligent is that? That's the sort of sorrow and the thing that Jesus is timing up here to see. Okay, so let's talk a little about the timing. Because you get this word ahead here, and I think about other parables like this one in Matthew chapter 14, or sorry, not Matthew, but Luke chapter 14, where there's the parable of the great feast where they all begin to make excuses. We're not going to read this, but you read it, and the guy sends out his servant at supper time, and he tells everybody, come because everything's ready. And it's like the guy's like, well, I've got these obligations that I've got to meet. And so for me, there was this problem. It's like, I mean, you kind of buy stuff in your everyday life, and you kind of have family. So what's the exact problem here? How are we supposed to get our hands in anything at all and ever do anything? But I want to notice here the practice here. In verse 16 and verse 17, it speaks to this wedding situation, this feast situation. It says, then he said, a certain man gave a great supper and invited many, and he sent his servants at supper time to say to those who were invited, come, for all things are now ready. So as we kind of mentioned earlier, analogous to the wedding situation, it's not like you can text people. I mean, you don't even have accurate timekeeping. And when it comes to food preparation, you've got to go on a hunting trip to get stuff. You don't actually know a date. You don't have modern timekeeping. So what they would do is they would send out word and say, there will be a feast in thus and such time. And then you kind of don't know what day or time it's going to be, but there would be this secondary invitation that then you would be a part of. And that initial invitation isn't so that you would just drop everything, But the time frame is giving, and that initial warning is to make sure that you don't have commitments that you can't drop. It's to make sure you are able to not be so busy with other things that you can't make the feast. And so in this case, and with the virgins and their preparation, the issue isn't that you didn't drop everything that you had going and come to this. The issue is you knew it was coming and you didn't take the steps that you needed to be there. And that's the issue with the 5 foolish virgins. It wasn't like, oh, it just sprung up on us. The whole point of the convention is if it's important to you, you've got plenty of time. It's an issue of laziness, not an issue of priority. And so as we think about kind of those stories together, it gives us an expectation of what Christ's return will be like. We don't know the exact time it will happen, but we need to ensure that we are prepared. First Thessalonians 5. I was tempted to read the whole chapter, but I sort of point out a couple things. The day of the Lord comes as a thief in the night. And he talks about in the next verse like labor pains upon a woman. That, I mean, you know that you're expecting a child. You've got a general sense of the gestation cycles and what the timing's going to be like on that, but you don't know when the first contraction's going to hit. You don't know, but you build your life, that whole entire season of your life, around making sure that when that first contraction hits, okay, we're going to the hospital, we're going to do whatever source or center it is. And so because we know it's coming, we don't know the exact time, that means we need to watch and be sober. We need to be awake. And in this case, he gives this idea of watchfulness and soberness as a metaphorical stupor and a metaphorical drunkenness, but also literal drunkenness and literal stupor, keeping our eyes up and being prepared. 2 Timothy 2:4, we won't go read it, but it reminds us that no soldier entangles himself in the affairs of this life. You know, while the bridegroom, while Christ delays his coming, there are certain things we put our hands on. Our employment, our families, the management of our time, our possessions that we've got to do. But we've got to make sure we don't hold to the things of this world so tightly that when the invitation comes, we're disqualified to participate in what he's called us into. And that's the message of this. That Jesus is delayed. And we have responsibilities to do things in the meantime that we'll talk about in the next parable especially. But if we've got our hands so tightly on these worldly things that it's distracting us, that we won't be able to respond to the invitation, then we stand in danger of the same judgment these people do. So what's the second parable? We're not going to go read it. But the parable of the talents broadly looks something like this. A certain man goes to a far country and he leaves his goods in the charge of 3 different servants. Now, 5 talents he gives to one. We'll talk about what a talent is in a moment. He gives 2 talents to another, and then 1 talent to the final one. So the 5-talent man and the 2-talent man, they double the money and they're rewarded, and the 1-talent man buries the money and is punished. That's kind of the broad outline of what this is. Now I'll quickly say a word about stewardship here, and the charging to this is that stewardship is legal rights to determine how the goods are used. It's authority over it. It's essentially, if you put someone on your bank account and make them a signer, when they sign that check, they've got the legal authority to disperse the funds. They're given full authority to administer these things, but whenever stewardship is given, it's given for the purpose of accomplishing the goals and the aims of the owner. A steward has the rights of determination for how things are used, but they don't have the right to determine why are we using it. They have to advance the aims of the person involved. And in this case, the aim that's to be advanced is just the use of that money to continue to grow and to gain a profit on the basis of that money. So that's what he's calling them to do. So let's talk about this word talent for a moment here, because this is a place where our current language, I think, can cause some confusion for us with this word talent. So the Greek word here, you can kind of see how it's related to talent. It's a measure of weight. So it's about 75 pounds or so, which is a pretty serious weight. And then as it goes to Latin, it kind of keeps that some, but it also kind of medieval Latin and into modern English kind of changes to this desire of something significant. If you think about 75 pounds of weight, I remember one time when I was doing some concrete stuff, Regan said they sell them in 80-pound bags and the 60-pound bags. And essentially he said, get the 60-pound bags because they're harder on your pocketbook, but they're easier on your back. That's what it told me to do roughly. Those are my words, not his, but that was the sentiment of it. So that 75-pound threshold is pretty significant. It's a lot of weight to try and carry. And when we talk about the amount of money, we'll mention that here in a moment. It's a lot of money. And so the word talent, you can kind of see, kind of takes this extra meaning here, where now today it means ability or skill. When we think about a talent, it's something you can do. People have a talent for piano, or people have a talent for art, or whatever it is that they're good at here. So it's a little bit different way to think of the word. We've got to be careful as we apply it. So, and one of the reasons for this, Matthew chapter 25, verse number 15. He gave the one 5 talents, to another 2, and another 1, to each according to his ability. So he gave the talents the sum of money according to their abilities or their talents. And so you kind of got the word talent used in 2 senses here. The way I like to think of this is he gave the responsibility in light of their ability. He gave them responsibility in light of their ability. We'll talk about that as we go. So what is meant by this word talent? It means 75 pounds. And 75 pounds of gold or silver is a lot of money. It's a weighty amount. It's a serious amount. So this is one place when it comes to talent that I'm going to say something I've never said in any pulpit ever. And I mostly say that to get Jay a little bit roused up, but it worked. So this is one place I think that the NIV and the NLT probably have as good a translation in English Bible as you do, because they just translate bags of gold or sacks of gold. That's kind of a good way to think about this, to lose the talent equivocation there. The bags of gold or sacks of gold. Every other place I've ever found might go a different translation, but I think theirs kind of also serves to that. More concretely, if you look at the ESV, it kind of gives you a footnote that it's about 20 years' wages, which kind of helps you to think about it. And if you want a modern equivalent that I think is really helpful, is one fully funded retirement account. So you got this amount of money, you're set for life. That's kind of the idea. So one person gets one fully funded retirement account. Another person, they get 2 fully funded retirement accounts. Another person, they get 5 fully funded retirement accounts. This is a significant amount of money depending on our tastes and our lifestyle and our living expenses. That may sliding scale who it is. But it gives you a sense of, this is a lot of money. This is a whole lot of money that even the one talent man has been entrusted with. Kind of to give you a sense of the scope. So, as we think about how this parable plays out, one of the important parts of parables is it's really, this point is about this parable, in all these parables, is about the wicked one and the lazy one. All of these parables are repeated teachings about how you be the kind of person that's pleasing when the Lord returns. When the Lord comes and gives account, when the Lord comes, or the husband comes in the previous parable, how do you make sure you're there? And so, in some sense, the rest of these stories are just kind of context given to help us understand those core teachings. Because the reason I'm emphasizing this is, in parables, there's a temptation oftentimes to try to draw minuscule details out of very peripheral things in the story. And that is a perilous interpretation. So I just want to throw that out there. So the core detail that's being driven at, the 5 talent guy and the 2 talent guy, I don't think you should really read a difference there. The point is, God rewards faithfulness with reward. That's the point there. The fact that he got 5, and he got 5, and he got 5 cities, and 2 and 2, is there something about God's administration of rewards? Potentially, but I think that's a more oblique case you have to make. Okay. So, what does the first guy say? Well, let's there we go. Let me come back here. Essentially, he ends up saying, he comes and he brings it. And he says, I know you're a hard man, I know you're a difficult man, I didn't want to disappoint you. And presumably by losing all the money. So he presents that I've got this fear that I don't want to lose the money, because if I lose all the money, that's going to be a really bad situation for me. That you're a hard lord, you're a strict businessman, and you don't take any prisoners. So if I lose all this money, that's a no-go situation. So I'm going to do something that makes it where I don't lose the money. I'm going to the safest thing possible. Now let's read verse 24, 25. Then he who received the 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you have not sown, and gathering where you have not scattered seed. I was afraid and went and hid your talent on the ground. Look, there you have what is yours. So that's what we just relayed. Verse 26 and 27. But his Lord answered him, saying, You wicked and lazy servant. You knew that I reap where I had not sown and gather where I had not scattered seed. So you ought to have deposited my money with the bankers, and at my coming I would receive back my own with interest. So here the master exposes that this is a facade. Essentially saying, if you're really trying to do a safe thing to appease me, you would at least want to put this thing in a savings account with a 0.25% interest to at least generate something. So this is one where historically I've kind of sympathized with this guy before, which may speak to my own psyche, I guess, perhaps in the way I need to think about things. But the issue here is not that he did a safe thing. The issue is that he actually did nothing. That's the issue there. There's a distinction between doing a safe thing and doing nothing. If he would have been concerned about the master's wrath and honoring the master, he would have taken a conservative route. That's allowable in this case. But he still needs to use the money for the purposes the master has given it to him, and he's got a safe and conservative route to do that that's also secure. He can have the security, and he can accomplish the master's wishes. He chose just one of them instead. What this shows is that this isn't just an issue of fear and honor for the master. It's an issue of laziness and apathy and disregard. Bearing the talent and giving to say, hey, I was worried about displeasing you, isn't about caution. It's about using caution to justify not doing anything. That's the difference here. It's about using caution to justify not doing anything. If you would, because here's the point. If he would have thought for any time at all, how can I use this cautiously and do what the master wants me to do? Then he would have come up with this bank or interest idea. That's what the master's thrown at. It's like, this takes 2 seconds of thought. And what he has exposed is that the bankruptcy of creativity the servant has shows he didn't consider it because he didn't care. That's what he's trying to show here, is you didn't think about it because you didn't care, and now you're using this excuse to try and justify yourself. And so I think it's best to take the talents, the sacks of gold, the retirement accounts, and all those sorts of things as opportunities in the broadest sense. They could be opportunities in this community as a church that we have. They could be opportunities that we have as a church or individually to support works and gospel labors in other places, to encourage one another in the church setting, to be parents, to be husbands, to employees, our literal finances, to share the gospel. We've all got things in front of us where we all have abilities, and God has placed these chances to advance His purposes in front of each and every one of us. Those are the things that are there for us to do. And so we've got to be stewards of those opportunities. Notice James 4, verse number 17. Therefore, to him who knows to do good and does not do it, to him it is sin. To him who knows to do good and does not do it, to him it is sin. And so we've got to be careful that we don't just say, well, I'm not doing anything wrong, therefore I'm okay. Whenever it comes to pleasing the master, being active in our service and doing the right thing is critical in that. In everything I do, in every role I'm in, I strive to maximize the will and the glory and the aims of God first of all. That's the message here. And that's how we make sure that we're pleasing to Him when He returns. Okay, with these first 2 parables in place, we shift to something that's kind of less parable-esque. And now it's more of this prophecy or foretelling of the final judgment. That's in chapter 25, 31 to 36. Now this includes an opening description. Here's why I kind of think this is a shift to the judgment, more specifically. When the Son of Man comes in His glory with all the holy angels, then He will sit on the throne of His glory. All the nations will be gathered before Him, and He will separate them one from the other, as the shepherd divides the sheep from the goats. And He will set the sheep on the right hand and put the goats on the left. And so, like I say, the fact that all the nations are gathered to be judged seems to indicate an extra level of intensity, which indicates the final cosmic judgment. So, as a shepherd divides sheep on the right and goats on the left, which is essentially, if you're a shepherd, the sheep are the ones that belong, and the goats are the ones that don't belong. Those who are pleasing, acceptable, and those who are not. And so he goes on to render 2 verdicts. We're not going to read super far into this. But he goes to render 2 verdicts. To the sheep on the right, he calls them to inherit the kingdom prepared for him from the foundation of the world. He shares why he gave that judgment. And then the goats, they're condemned to eternal fire for the devil and his angels for their disobedience, as well as for this judgment as well. And then he gives this final emphatic statement that we'll look at at the end. So let's look at the cause of this. Let's look at the reasons for why these people are rejected or not rejected. Matthew 25, 34 and 31. Then the king will say to those on his right hand, come, you blessed my Father. Inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. Then the righteous will answer him, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you? Or thirsty and give you drink? When did we see you a stranger and take you in? Or naked and clothe you? Or when did we see you sick or in prison and come to you? And the king will answer and say to them, assuredly I say to you, inasmuch as you did it to one of these, the least of my brethren, you did it to me. And now we've heard this passage before. He goes on, essentially just change all the words to the negatives, and he gives that same judgment to those on the left. To the goats, you didn't do all these things. You didn't do all these things. And they say, when did we ever see you and not do this? Well, when you didn't do it to these people. And so the message here is that Jesus takes these sins very seriously. Just as we saw about who knows to do good and doesn't do it, to him it is sin. Similarly, Jesus thinks very seriously, not just about the sins that we co-commission, the sins we commit, but the sins we omit, the things that we left done. In this case, a person's choice to have compassion on a weak brother or sister, positively or negatively, is one that Jesus takes very personally. When we look at our brothers and sisters and we share love with them or we refuse to share love with them, Jesus takes that as kindness to him or spite to him. And it's really incredible that that's something he sees as something that distinguishes those who will inherit the kingdom of God or not. That the people who the kingdom is prepared for is those who do these good things. And those who go into everlasting fire is those who don't do these things. Now, I want to say a few words to kind of clarify about this, because there's this call, and it's like, because you read this text and you're like, okay, I need to start writing checks now. Start emptying my wallet to any good cause I can find. And I want to clarify a few things here to kind of put this in context, and then I want to come around and kind of wrap it up. To clarify here, one thing in these texts and in many of the texts is the primary focus, especially with the harshness of warnings towards brethren in Christ. That's where the primary focus is. In this case, the least of these my brethren. We'll look at 1 John chapter 3, but it talks about if you see a brother or sister doing these sorts of things. Similarly, James chapter 2, if you've got this world's goods and you see your brother or sister, and you tell them to part peace, be warmed and filled, then you're not doing any good at all. So there's an explicit emphasis on our brothers and sisters in Christ and treating them with compassion. Galatians 6 gives an emphasis in our acts of compassion to the household of faith. And so when it comes to the people in this room and in our congregation, treating them with compassion is essential. And that's the primary focus of this teaching. Second, this is about the bodily needs of people. It's about the necessary goods that people need to continue to live and exist, and showing mercy to them in points where they're sick or when they're in prison and they're helpless. 1 Timothy 6 commands us to be content with food and clothing, potentially food, clothing, and shelter, depending on your reading here. And this is a case where we've got to be really careful about letting our modern conceptions of what is a need and what's necessary to continue living and what's a luxury on that list, okay? So, we may all recognize there's a need for our jobs and things like that to have a smartphone. Many of us just kind of have to have that in our job. If you want to do your job, you got to have various tools and technology, but you don't have to have it for your heart to keep you in, okay? And so we've got to be really careful to not use this as too much license for luxuries, because it's not about luxuries. It's about keeping people alive. It's about keeping people alive is the primary interest there. Okay, third, this isn't, this is about goods, not money, okay? Notice he says, I was hungry and you gave me no food. I was thirsty and you gave me no drink. Notice he doesn't say, I was hungry and you gave me no money. I was thirsty and you gave me no money. I was this and you gave me no money. This is about the distribution of the things they actually need. One time I was over on Grand, and I was parked, I was sending a text message or making a call or something like that. And a lady tapped on my window and she said, I need some money, and Jesus says if you don't help people, he'll never do anything for you. Which it was as brazen as I've ever heard it. And it works great in sermons, because it's just a great illustration of that attitude, that these passages are not about currency per se, it's about physical goods, which I recognize there's a connection with those things, but this isn't about blank checks, it's about providing things people actually need, which brings us to kind of the fourth consideration, it's not enabling people. There's other things in the context of the passage, that these things are about our attitude towards people and our willingness to give them legitimate help that they actually need. And many of you know that throwing money at a problem usually makes us feel good and often harms the people we're trying to help. If you just throw money at a problem, if you just throw a check at a problem, all you've done is you finance them, continue to do things that are self-destructive. So that's something we've got to consider, that unless people want to help themselves, very little amount of earthly goods is going to help them. And perhaps the things that I know people that have been in situations where they needed to experience a lack of worldly goods because of the consequences of their decisions. So we'll kind of tie a bow on that here in a moment. But we need to make sure that our giving isn't being exploited and that we're not enabling people to continue to do good. And so that's where sort of this, the fact that we're helping brothers and sisters in Christ can really give us a leg up on doing that. So there's some guide rails there. That means you don't have to, everybody that asks for money, you just have to give them money. That's not what this is saying. But on the other hand, let's not chop off the knees of this teaching, because this should be a challenging teaching. This should be challenging to the way we think about our funds and our goods and our compassion for people. We can't just say, well, I don't want to, or I think you're not worthy, and so I'm not going to help you. That's not an option. It's not okay to look at people and say, well, they're not deserving of my help. That's not allowable from this. Notice, especially to our brothers and sisters. 1 John 3, verse 17, but whoever has this world's goods, you've got the ability, and you see your brother in need, and shut his heart from him, how is the love of God abiding in him? If we have resources and we see somebody in need and we shut up our heart. Now, notice it doesn't say you see your brother in need and you don't give anything, how's the love of God abide in you? But if your heart doesn't go out to them, if you're callous in your heart towards people, there's a request, and you don't at least entertain the thought of how do I actually help them? Because like we said, the request they may be giving us of I need this, they probably got a need. There may be a legitimate need there, but it may not be the thing they're asking for. They may need something else. And the heart of compassion is going to try to look at their situation and address what do they actually need. While we may not choose, out of wisdom and obligations, to not enable someone or to divert our resources to other causes, if the cause of us looking at a brother or sister and deeming them unworthy of support is pride, conceit, or a lack of care that causes us to be callous, and this warning is for you and me. If we see people who are in genuine need, in our brothers and sisters, and we think to ourselves, well, we could actually help this problem, but I'm just not going to do it. Then we may fall into the judgment there. So there's, like I say, there's a lot of wisdom and there's a lot of back and forth in this, but this should be challenging. It should be challenging to me, and I hope it's challenging to you as well, that we can't let ourselves grow jaded to people who abuse the goodwill of others, and that we receive freely and we need to freely give. And I am thankful for the generosity of everyone here, that we need to view our lives as a conduit of the aims of Christ and generously live to reflect His blessings to other people. Notice this warning here that's given. These will go away to everlasting punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. Whenever we think about the cause of eternal judgment, about those who go into everlasting punishment, usually we start listing the works of the flesh and all these sins that disqualify you. Notice there's not a single particular vice of the flesh on this list that Jesus says. All it is the refusal to have this heart. Now here's the thing. Those hearts set on fleshliness is going to tend to act out in those negative ways. So it's sort of it's not to say you can do everything right and forget to give and then you go to hell, because if you're doing everything right, you're going to develop that heart. So that's sort of where it is. But the seriousness with which Jesus takes this, and so as we think about these other two parables, and the need to be prepared, and the need to work and to labor, and to think about our resources as doing good, is we need to be people who are full of doing good. That the way we prepare, as 2 Peter chapter 3 says, to look forward and hasten the day of Christ coming, is to be the kind of people we need to be. And to evaluate what it is we're doing and the things we're getting ourselves involved with. That there's good and wonderful pursuits of advancement that can make us even better in the kingdom, and there's some stuff we can get ourselves involved in that are nothing but a distraction. And what's the right answer? It's to look carefully and honestly and with counsel and evaluate ourselves. Is this what's going to advance me into Christ, or is this going to advance me in my personal development? And to make that choice in the will of God. And so as we look, we need to be thinking about every part of our lives and every part of our resources as being ready and preparing for the day that Christ returns. I want to encourage you into that. I want to encourage you to think and to continue to examine yourselves. And so as we think about that, that gives us this opportunity, as we're about to sing an invitation song, to think about where do we fall as it pertains to our preparation. That perhaps there's things where we're just spiritually drunk, or we're spiritually lazy, we're not spiritually watching, or we're physically in a lull, and we're not watching. That if Christ were to come back tonight, we can't say that we're watching, or that if we look at the way we're using the talents and abilities that we have, we're not doing them for our purposes. There's things in front of us and that we need to try and seize to the best of our abilities. Where there's cases of mercy and compassion that we're not extending, and trying to do those in a way that honors God. For any of us, if there's a place as we look at our lives where we need help with that, please come have us go front as together we stand.